Hello and welcome to the Tuesday, September 14th meeting of the Finance Committee pursuant to the Governor's June 16th, 2021 Act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Laws, Chapter 30A, Paragraph 20. The Finance Committee will be using remote participation for this meeting. The audio of this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the town's webpage within 24 hours in accordance with keeping the public informed of actions during this meeting. I would ask that all participants remotely attending this meeting please state your name for identification purposes each time you speak throughout the meeting. At this time, I will take a roll call of attendance. Mr. Murphy.
Yes, I'm here.
Ms. Ziemer.
Here.
Mr. Alfred.
Present.
Mr. Whitaker.
Present.
Mr. Robinson.
Here.
Okay, and I am of course here, so we are officially in session. I just don't have much on the administrative side, just wanted to give a quick update. I did get our first set of minutes from Lisa, and I haven't had a chance. She sent them to me for review of the format, kind of what I went through with you, Mark, last year. So I haven't given them back to her yet because I just haven't had a chance to. But once I get those to her, which should probably occur in the next day or so, we'll start having minutes to review going forward to catch up on the ones that we've been missing for the last couple of meetings. Okay. Other than that, there's nothing else that I know of administratively. So we can go right to agenda item number 2, which is the reason for our full attendance tonight, which is the governance committee would like to talk to us about yet another proposal they have. So Sam, I'll let you take it from here.
Okay. It's actually not another proposal. It's a proposal you've already heard. It was in Article 9. And this is we thought that basically the Capital Planning Committee was a good idea. It could be a standalone piece, not tied to a whole budget process. And so we're thinking about, coming back for the October town meeting with that recommendation, along with what we had also recommended as Section 2 in the Finance Committee, Article 4, that would allow members of the Finance Committee to serve on other boards if appropriately authorized. And obviously that was of interest to us because in our plan for a Capital Planning Committee, a member of the Finance Committee is an integral part of that committee. And so that's the reason for having that language that would allow members to serve. So it was something that was of interest and brought up to us originally in one of our meetings with the Finance Committee. So it's really, the idea is to bring back both proposals sort of as one unit. So that we would go forward with the Capital Planning Committee. This is basically a five registered voters, but 3 members that would act ex officio and would really be responsible for the planning preparation of a capital budget that would, it's not really stated this way, but would go to the town administrator to be submitted to the select board, then also to the Finance Committee. The workings of the Planning Committee, Capital Planning Committee, is that whenever there would be a presentation for a capital project, the Finance Committee would be, and the town administrator would be invited to attend. The committee would serve as a source to both town administrator and the Finance Committee. So it's not all that unlike, what exists now in the capital planning program, but it would replace it and does have a slightly different mix, I think, in terms of membership, but not much of a difference, and same objective. So that's the thought.
Sam, we have to do a roll call for us.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you want to just introduce your group and do roll call before you get in back and forth?
Well, it all depends. I mean, you can do that. right? If you're planning on meeting, but as long as they're not deliberating, it's actually okay. But go ahead, Sam, if you want to call your meeting.
I'll do that. I don't need to, I'm assuming I don't need to read the statement because it
No, you don't need to read the statement.
can, but we'll do the roll call. So we'll start with Mr. Engel,
Present.
Mr. LeBeau,
Present.
Mr. McKechnie,
Present.
Ms. Shaughnessy,
Present.
and Sam Tyler, present. Okay, we're all here.
So continue, Sam. Unless that's it.
So we wanted to come to, this meeting to be able to talk to you about it and see what your thoughts are in terms of bringing this up as an item for the October town meeting, and both parts, the capital planning committee part, also the revision to the finance committee's bylaw, which would basically eliminate the sentence that would limit their ability and allow membership, finance committee members to serve on other committees where it really made sense and where it was authorized by either the general bylaws of the town of Holliston or a vote of town meeting or state law.
Okay, well, I see several members have questions, so I'll just start in the order I see them. Vin was up first, I guess.
Yeah, the first thing I noticed is the 3-year terms. Now, I saw it on the first one, but it wasn't the priority, so I didn't bring it up. First time you brought it and proposed it. The 3-year terms I have a problem with, and I'm thinking more of each committee is a brand new committee. Each year gets elected, regardless if you have the same people sitting on it. But what you're doing is you're holding the prior committee bound by what was happening holding a present committee bound what was happening to a prior committee. So, a vote for 3 years. I understand why you wanted to do it because you want to have continuity. However, I think you got to give the responsibility to the committees to decide, and each committee is elected and each committee is new, given every year, regardless of if it's the same people serving on it, it's still a brand new committee for that fiscal year. So that would be one thing I would strike is the 3-year terms, and then all the thing with from when the committee is established, blah, blah, blah. Everything else is okay. I mean, so that's my first thing. And if you want to think about that and provide feedback. The other thing popped in my head just now as you guys were talking, or Sam was talking. Did you guys give thought about expanding the way the policy is now, which is the capital planning committee sits? We have 3 members of the FinCom right now sitting on it. And how about just expanding that to have the additional school committee member, planning board member, and select board member? So now it's 7 as opposed to 5. And the reason I'm bringing that up is the way I saw it working and seen it working, the vetting done by the FinCom, regardless of who's on it, I think more would be better, more views, but that way the whole committee wouldn't have to be weighed on it, but having a larger group of the FinCom gives that much weight into the final decision made by the group, by the capital planning committee. So those are a couple thoughts I just had.
Okay, let's see, I think Michelle was next.
I was just wondering, actually, it's more of a question for Travis. When are we going to get the report from DLS?
I'm jumping all over the place here. We were expecting it in September. The last time I checked in on them, it was mid-September, which is where we are now. I would say any day now. I don't have even really kind of a general sense of what their points are going to be. I think it is relatively holistic, but I would say that we'll have that before town meeting.
Because I think anything like this is premature without knowing what their comments are. I think we're jumping the gun. I'd like to see what they recommend before we go to town meeting with anything like this.
Okay. Is that it, Michelle?
Yeah, especially if we're so close.
Oh. So, Dan?
You guys
I sort of echo some of what Ben said about the 3 years. It just, I mean, I can't remember don't remember the exact language, but what if somebody left the board that appointed them and they had a 3-year term? Do we? I don't know if we raised it for this. I know there was another similar issue that we raised it for, just making sure that they, that their term ended when they left the appointing board. But I think that having them appointed each year, makes sense, and it's most positions like that are done like that. But I guess taking a step back for a second, I'm still a little bit confused. I guess a little bit frustrated in how you guys are approaching the changes. I still am waiting for a holistic sort of top-down approach to how we want our government to look. I really don't know why we want to make any changes until we know what the top is going to look like and how the executive functioning of the board. I mean, are we going to stick with a quote unquote weak town administrator, go to a quote unquote strong town administrator, go to a town town manager? Are we going to keep the select board as a 3-member or expand it to a 5-member? It just seems like there are a lot of decisions that have significant ramifications down the chain, and you guys are proposing, and with I know this isn't sort of exactly why you're here, but with the potential changes for the assessors, and I don't know if you've decided on what the recommendation for that would be, but I'm just saying, changing all of that it really seems like we're kind of doing this piecemeal and almost backwards, rather than sort of tackling the big high level sort of how do we want Holliston to be governed at a top down level. And then based upon those decisions, there are many other decisions that, sort of some would probably not make any sense. Others would, make a lot more sense. And I don't know. I really don't know what the town wants, right? I mean, obviously, if you have a town manager, it's becoming a much probably bigger government, right? It may not be exactly what Holliston. I mean, so
Sorry about that.
So I guess
my text message notification.
So I guess that's sort of where I am. I'm just sort of flummoxed by how this is still just being approached. And I've watched some of your meetings to discuss sort of your town meeting by town meeting sort of tentative sort of schedule on what you kind of want to address. And I guess the select board, the composition of the select board doesn't even get addressed until like the end of the 3rd year or something. And the town administrator is shortly before that. I'm not sure why that wouldn't be done together. I mean, it feels like almost like if it were me, I'd say, okay, let's take a beat. I get that there's going to probably some turnover in the assessor's office and whatnot, but we can deal with that, and just let's just try to figure out what the government, what the people of Holliston want the government to, or what your recommendation for what the form of government for Holliston should be going forward, so that way we kind of know that they're not changes to that coming down the line. So that would be my overall thoughts.
Mr. Robinson.
Yeah, I'm gonna take it a different way because I think my teammates have asked some good questions. So, Sam or someone from your team, like instead of telling you something, I'm going to ask you something. Can you help me understand why we wouldn't wait for the DLS report? What's the thought of going to the town with this proposal before everyone's had a chance to review the DLS report? Can you just help me understand that?
This is Sam. Well, basically, as Travis said, I think we'll see that the Technical Assistance Bureau report. We also have a deadline of the 20th of this month to submit articles to the Select Board's office. Adjustments can be made after that. So we're just trying to meet a deadline, knowing that the report will be out. The Capital Planning Committee language is pretty consistent with what we've seen in other towns that have special acts or charters. So we thought that this is one area where we could go forward and it would be consistent, could be melded in with later proposals. And, you know, we're not going to go forward with any changes with the Board of Assessors. There's basically general laws that have already set up how the Board of Assessors are going to deal with the fact that the principal assessor will be leaving in May. And so we're not going to address that issue.
Okay.
Or frankly, with the town accountant or the treasurer at this point in time. So it's really what we're going forward with is basically just the proposal for the planning committee, and thinking that will, you know, if there's a reason because of the tab report to take it off the table, we can do that. But we don't think that's going to be the case. But we have time to wait. I mean, town meeting's not until October 18th. So.
Okay. Yeah, I have two more quick questions. So what I heard was that the push is like, it sounds like the report's a little bit later than what we originally expected. And you're trying to hit the deadline. Like there's a push to get this into the October meeting instead of waiting for May. And then the terms that like Dan and Ben were asking about, and like Sam, especially with your background, is that like set up in terms of the terms, like staggering terms? Is that something unique, or is that something you've seen in your past, in your former career or your other job?
Well, this job and that job, I think the idea of staggered terms, 3-year terms is fairly common. I think the continuity of experience is important. Which is the basis, and it's because it's really what we've seen. We haven't seen in other town proposals for a capital planning committee anything less than a 3-year term.
Okay, so you've seen it's relatively common from your perspective. And then why, like Dan was saying, like why not take a holistic view? I think in the select board meeting last night, when the select board was talking about the sidewalks and plan for water, John Cronin was saying, like, instead of taking things in small bites, let's have a holistic plan, so that you know, in that case it was because we don't want to put in a sidewalk and then rip it up when we do piping. But John was saying, like, take a top-down approach. That's coming from the select board, and now you're hearing the same thing from one of the members of the finance committee. So can you help us understand why, at least from what we're hearing, like we're taking things in pieces or kind of organically versus a top-down approach?
Well, this is Sam again, and I can speak after that. I think it's because we thought there were some, you know, smaller, if you will, issues we could cover, but that the big change that, and frankly, from what we've learned over the last month or so in terms of what we can't do just by bylaw, has made us think that, you know, when we take a look at the town administrator position, which some of your members have called weak, there will be changes there that will, we hope, at least bring us up to par where the responsibilities of other town administrators in surrounding towns or comparable towns are, because we're not there by any means, and that will entail other responsibilities that will really fill out, I think, more so the picture of where we hope to go. It won't, you know, I think that's going to be a big issue, that putting things like a capital planning committee or even the 3-member, 5-member board of selectmen, which we want to get to, we will, is going to be less important. So I think it's because so much, well, I think that you'll see much more of a change recommended anyway, in terms of the May town meeting, since it is the May annual town meeting. And we'll address the town administrator position.
Okay. So you see this as relatively straightforward, trying to hit a deadline. The terms that we talked about, your staggered terms you're saying are fairly common, and you're taking, you're trying to identify where you have low-hanging fruit with the understanding that some of the other things in the top-down plan are going to take a lot more cycles. So instead of waiting to get the low-hanging fruit, you're trying to pick away at it now. Did I summarize? Did I get that right?
Yeah, I'd say because we haven't, obviously, we didn't pass what we wanted to pass in the May town meeting. So what did pass was, using your term, low-hanging fruit. I think, capital planning committee is important, but it's top tier importance. But it would be a step forward, and then really it would be how we address and what we recommend based on input from all sides in terms of the town administrator position.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ken.
Now, if I may, I know I had seen that Joan had her hand up to, I think, answer part of what you asked, Jay, so if it's all right.
Thank you, Sam. Joan Shaughnessy. I have raised some of the similar concerns about the report from DLS, et cetera, in our governance meetings. And where I'm coming out is that when there is a comprehensive change, there's going to be a lot of facets to it. And this would just be one fewer elements to explain. Now, that might seem like it's going backwards anyway, but hear me out, if you will. I don't think that there's any controversy or any doubt that the presence of a capital planning committee would have a presence in Holliston. It might be a year or two before we have a change, a more holistic change in the government. The work, if this committee could get 1 or 2 years under its belt, whatever form, and we can talk about that after, but if we can, whatever form this committee takes, the work from that committee can then be used by the then government. Or it's, in other words, this is a layup. Like everybody, I don't think there's a person in town that could say, we don't need a capital planning committee. Now, is it the one that is in place now in the FinCom? I don't know. That's something we can talk about. But there's no reason to delay this component, I think is what we're taking. We really only have 3 bites at the apple. And if nothing else changed, this would be a really good thing to get in. And it wouldn't be part and parcel of, because some people don't like change, so they'll just say no to everything. But this is something we can all agree, let's just get this done. And if it has to change in a more holistic plan, then it will change from its then current state. I don't see a point. I mean, I do see a point in waiting, but I think the benefits outweigh the drawbacks. And Vin, to your question about having, I don't think you can have other members, non-FinCom members on a FinCom subcommittee. I could be wrong about that. That's probably a Travis question or a Paula Bowe question.
That's not what I'm saying. You're missing what I said.
Oh, forgive me if I misunderstood.
Are you all set, Joan? Do you want, because I'll let Vin.
Sure. If I thought he was saying using the current FinCom structure.
Yeah.
No, what I said was expanding what we have by having 3 members on the committee of this capital planning committee. So make it a 7-member board as opposed to a 5-member committee.
Forgive me, I misunderstood.
So, no, I totally agree. You can't have a subcommittee but no. And I go back, I want to have a discussion regarding 3-year terms. It sounds like, well, we're going to do the same thing we did in the spring, which I heard from several people of the public, including one of the members of the board, select board, just looking at other towns does not mean we should be doing what we're doing. Tell me why we should be doing a 3-year term. And I'm giving you arguments why it makes a problem with it, because you're saying, well, other towns do it. That's great. But I'm also giving you the point that each committee is a new committee. So why shouldn't they have the ability to appoint somebody new on that capital planning committee? And if they want to have continuity, so be it. And if we see a problem with it and we need to have a long term, let's correct it later rather than binding those committees, the finance committee, the school committee, planning board, and the town moderator. Those 5 different groups. I think that's a thing. Have you discussed this with the school committee? Have you discussed this with the planning board of saying we only want to have the ability to appoint once? Because that committee can change, like I've said, and your whole body says, oh, we really don't want to have that person. Have you thought about that?
So then is that just talking to Joan, or is that what you wanted, what you raised your hand about?
Yeah, I mean, my concern, I've heard the same thing saying, like, we're going to look at the other towns because other towns are doing it. But I don't think you should be focused solely on what other towns are doing unless, well, it agrees to what we think is best for our town. I think your committee has a tendency to get too myopic and saying, well, this is what other towns are doing, without saying, well, is this the best thing for the town?
Then I completely hear what you're saying, and I tend to agree with you. I hadn't really thought about that part of it. I'm wondering if maybe we can get to an agreement or a meeting of the minds on whether this committee should be formed starting at the October town meeting, and then we can talk about the rest of it, the mechanics of it, and what makes sense for Holliston. But I think we have to come to a philosophical agreement that such a committee made of many different parts should be formed sooner rather than later. And that's sort of, I think, what we're doing here.
Well, I don't think you can. I think, yes, I agree, but I think you need to get all the details in order. If you're
Absolutely. I'm saying from a philosophical perspective, let's not debate both things. Let's put one to bed and then talk about the logistics of it.
Okay, so I just want to point out something, because I just want to make sure that everybody understands one thing. The Article 33 capital, what we would call the current capital planning committee, if you want to call it that, right, authorized under the current bylaws, has the ability to add to its membership at any time. So there's no change needs to be made for that subcommittee to add members from the planning board or anywhere else. They're not voting members, right? Because ultimately it's a committee that reports to the finance committee. But for example, in the current construction of the committee, we have the town administrator, we have the facilities manager, we have a liaison from the schools already involved in the committee. If we wanted to, we could very easily get a planning board member. And, in other words, I just want to make sure everybody understands that the current construct we have does not preclude this kind of group getting together. So, okay, go ahead, Scott, if you want to.
Yeah, Ken, just to that point, it's Scott McKechnie, just to that point, but those would be non-voting members that you're talking about.
Correct.
So there is a big difference. My point is
there is a big difference.
Okay, just make sure, just clarifying. That's all.
Yes,
thank you.
Yes, that's why I said they're non-voting members, right?
Right.
But the other thing I will point out, though, is this is one of the questions I had about the proposal, which was, I'm not even clear what the role of this proposed committee will be, because ultimately the finance committee has to weigh in on make recommendations on all financial decisions, right? The select board has, certain inputs as well. So that's where I wasn't clear. So you form this capital planning committee and they can make recommendations, but those recommendations still have to go through full finance committee review for a recommendation from the finance committee.
That's what
but if I may, Ken?
Yeah.
I think the purpose is, again, it's just third party of a group of individuals that the makeup we've talked about. They get together and they get their recommendations and they submit the recommendations to the finance committee for their review. not the finance committee making recommendations of finance committee. You're missing that piece.
No, okay, that's fine. That's fine.
That's what this does. This will put a 5 body of individuals together that from various aspects of the town, have various inputs, various thoughts, right? Get that? Pretty simple. You say they could do it right now, but they won't have a vote. But their vote's going to be, this is what we suggest that the FinCom vote on or take a look at. So it's,
Right.
again, it's that's the whole, that's the recommendation. That's the purpose behind this.
But Scott, that's kind of what they, I mean, you know, what we do now, I mean, an executive board needs to make a request, right? And generally it has to be on the capital improvement plan, right? That the town administrator runs. And then it goes to then it goes to the finance committee, or it goes to the finance committee, you know, the subcommittee for a vote. I don't think that the subcommittee's sort of negative vote means that the full finance committee wouldn't see it, or that there's not, you know, it's more of just a recommendation, right? So it's, even though they don't have a vote per se, I don't see really, I don't really see it changing much because
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
It's a vote, but it's also a voice, right? We've heard in the town that some committees have a louder voice, or heard louder, and this this just brings in 5 different aspects that have 5 different voices, 5 opinions, and they collectively can come together with a decision that they feel is best for the town and submit it to the FinCom. It's as simple as that.
But I do want to challenge you a little bit on that. Not challenge, but just so every committee in town either reports to the select board, and therefore the select board is their voice, or they can, you know, choose to sort of come separately. But, you know, the select board is supposed to be their voice, or is an independently elected board, which they have a voice too because they present, you know, they make requests directly to the finance committees. Now, some may choose to exercise it or not, but if you're going to expand the capital committee, I mean, shouldn't every executive board then have a seat and a vote? Like, shouldn't there be a library? Shouldn't there be? I mean, no. I mean, you know, shouldn't there be a parks? I mean, assessors, I guess, but they don't really use capital. But I'm just saying, like, if you're really trying to sort of raise the voices, you know, give people, ensure that they have a voice, you know.
Right. Then, well, to that point, I want to clarify one other thing, which is, you know, I think that's what's lost in some of this discussion. And I'm not opposed to the idea. I'm just kind of telling you my thought process about this, right? The concern that I have is this, right? There's a reason why the original bylaw was likely constructed the way it is. And my understanding is because of conflicts of interest, right? If you have a school board representative, the finance committee doesn't get capital. We don't build water treatment plants. We don't build schools. We don't buy trucks, right? So, and by definition and setup, the finance committee is not a part of these things because they provide financial oversight, right? So the reason that only the finance committee gets votes on the subcommittee is largely because the votes are supposed to be objective, right? You don't want to, and I was actually tell you that old select board members have told me this, right? That one of the problems that they solved with that bylaw was that they had this situation where there were tremendous conflicts, and they got to the point where they said, we need to have, that's why they took out, by the way, that's supposedly the history behind why we can't serve on other boards and committees, was because at one time, the finance committee had people on it that were on the school committee, that were on other committees, and there was inherent conflict, right? So they got rid of that. So all I'm trying to say is that I think that underlying a lot of this is this implication that somehow what was set up is wrong. And I think that doesn't do a service to the people who put it together the first time. Maybe it doesn't fit. Maybe the town has grown. Maybe things have changed. I get that. But I don't inherently see a system that says, okay, we structured it around this idea that a finance committee is an independent voice, and anybody who's got a vested interest doesn't get a vote. They get a voice. They're brought in. As I said, you look today, we have a subcommittee that has, none of the members of the subcommittee from the finance committee have ever gone to a subcommittee meeting and just said to everybody else, we're voting, so shut up. We listen to everybody. We have everybody there. We invite more people. We've had from the beginning. But at the end, it's in my mind, at least, it's a real stretch to say that, okay, if somebody's there from the school committee, that they're going to have an objective interest in their vote. We want their opinion, but should they be voting to support their own capital? That's it goes without saying they're going to vote for that, right? So that's I think part of the problem that you have with, I know what you're trying to do in getting a voice, but I think that this whole issue of voting versus non-voting, I think actually works well to say they get their voice, but they are out of the process of recommendation because they have a vested interest. So go ahead, Scott, you raised your hand again, and I'll let these guys go.
No, I'm just thinking, Ken, that again, it's almost beneficial to the finance committee to have a committee like this so that you're not put in the position of making policy decisions. Should it be this piece of equipment, this field, this building, and so you get this third party group that formulates the plan for the town on a 5-year rolling basis, and they can present that to the finance committee, what they're determining. So it gives you some cushion, if you will, that you're not making these decisions, because someone could construe that the finance committee is making the decisions on the capital recommendations to the town. Well, now the finance committee can say, okay, well, it's coming from a third party to the.
I'll get to that, Michelle. So
that's all. I'm just thinking it could benefit the town and benefit the finance.
So Scott, I'll say a couple of things. Okay, first of all, I think it would. I think that this idea that the finance committee has no role in policy is patently false. Now, the reason I say that is there are different types of policy, right? The finance committee is an independently elected body with one purpose: to make recommendations. Inherent in those recommendations are the opinions of the 7 members, right? You may be pro-school, you may be anti-school. We had a member that was anti-everything capital and voted no on everything capital, right? So, but so in that sense, I think that people say, well, you're making policy. That's not making policy. That's doing the job they were elected to do. If you don't like the opinion or the viewpoint of the person making the decision, then don't elect them next time they're up for re-election, right? But the other thing is that I also think I worry a little because you give this impression that the finance committee puts together this plan. That is not the case. Right now, again, ignoring when we had a town administrator who wasn't capable and the finance committee had to step into some of these roles, right? But right now, the capital subcommittee takes its leadership from Travis. We meet and we have the finance committee running the meeting because it's our subcommittee, but the 5-year capital plan is presented and maintained by Travis, and that was by agreement of the finance committee. We wanted him to do that, right? So I want to be very clear about that. We are not deciding what gets on that list. We are deciding what we recommend to the town from what the town administrator presents to us, right? And he gives us the plan and we look through all the things. And when I say we, I'm talking about the 3 finance committee members and all the other people we've invited to the meeting. He shares his screen and we go through these things one by one. So I definitely don't want anybody to think that because we've had that role in the past or we've taken more of that role in the past, that is our intent or, even the, I think what my point is you may be fixing a problem that doesn't exist anymore. So anyway, okay, so let's get to some of that. Michelle, you had your hand up. I'll go in order.
First of all, I've never been on the capital planning committee, but I think that you all are doing a disservice to the people who've served on it by talking about how we really need one. We have a capital planning committee and the people on it are working very hard and they put in a lot of hours before our meetings. And I want to thank them for the work that they've done. The current members and the members in the past have really done a lot of work. And I just want to let you know that the process has changed as Ken alluded to. In the past, the liaisons would call capital needs and we'd go through it, and DPW would say, we need, this dump truck, we need this, we need that. That doesn't happen anymore. Now we go through and we say, we know you've talked to Travis. Is there anything else, that's come up? Is there, it's all funneled through Travis. So it's a different process than it was in the past. And I just want to remind you that it is our job we're elected to make decisions. and to make recommendations to town meeting. That is what we are elected to do. And we have to use our judgment. That we're not elected to just let everything go through. It funnels through us and we make those recommendations. And if this goes to town meeting, I'm going to get up there and I'm going to remind people that in May, we told people we're an independent body and this is why this should be voted down. And I will give the same reasons I gave in May. And I will say the exact same thing. And you're going to hear the same thing from town meeting about how they don't care what other towns do. This is Holliston. And it's not going to fly if you start talking about other towns because they don't care.
Can we have a Wi-Fi committee that improves Michelle's Wi-Fi? So, okay, let's see who was next. Dan, you were next.
Yeah, so thanks. So yeah, just to echo a little bit of that, I just, we heard some of these arguments back in May about saving us from ourselves and increasing the independence. And I didn't buy it then and I don't buy it now. And even back in the dark days of the prior town administrator, it wasn't like, anyone was going to Sean Reese and saying, my street's not getting plowed very well. What I want you to do is I want you to request 2 or 3 pieces of additional, machinery to do that. Then that would be, I would say probably, going beyond what we wanted. We would say, hey, what are your needs? We would have, liaison discussions, but it was always being driven by what the executive boards, because we wouldn't review anything until an executive board had really taken a vote on it. So again, it's not, the process is not driven by us or the capital subcommittee or the finance committee. I mean, these are requests that are coming from now basically the town administrator who's done it from all the departments. I just want to go back on one thing and just to clarify, when I said that we have a weak town administrator form of government, I did not mean that Travis was weak, far to the, quite to the contrary. It was just that we have a strong select board in that the select board has most of the powers vested in them and the town administrator doesn't. And so versus a strong town administrator, which has more sort of executive responsibility under their belt.
You just deflated Paul's balloon there, so.
Well,
I'm sorry. Paul was a strong town administrator, but in mind only. So then, but getting back to sort of cart before the horse too, if the decision was to go to a town manager, don't you think in a town manager form of government, the capital planning group might look different? Maybe the town manager could potentially chair that, or I don't know. I mean, if you're going to go to something where you're really going to have a very sort of powerful professional that is running the town, I think that all of this could potentially look different. And whether it's, it may end up, I don't know, but it just, again, it does seem like we're still putting the cart before the horse. If you brought other people in to be non-voting members, I think that they would raise their voice. The votes aren't going to really, the votes don't matter because it's still the finance committee still has to review these things. And if they're requests, then they're requests and they're from the executive boards. So I don't know. I do think we're probably trying to solve a problem that we didn't have to. I know that maybe there was this appearance anyway that this wasn't that big of a deal back in May, but I think it was maybe more so that the rest of it was a much bigger problem that we didn't focus on this as much. But anyway, I know you guys are working hard and trying, but
you all set, Dan?
Yeah.
Okay, Jay?
There we go. A couple of points based on what Dan said, and I think Ken said. I'm trying to understand, so the nature of this board is that you said that you'd have representation from the select board, finance committee, school committee, planning board. And what Dan said kind of resonated with me, which is that, what about the parks committee or, the other groups that don't roll up through the town administrator? So how would those folks in your plan have a voice through this committee that you're forming? Let me ask that question first.
I think I think the easiest answer is that the facilities manager, who is knowledgeable about all facility needs would be part of that and be able to answer those questions or make those cases if they need to be made. But you also want to make sure you don't have an unwieldy committee. And you're talking numbers that I think would get you to that point, that it would be
too many numbers, too many people on the committee. You're saying would be unwieldy. Okay. So
school committees that are 13 members, which is ridiculous and totally ineffective. So
okay, I got it.
I would be leery of large committees and recognize that you do have a professional town facilities manager that is well versed in the needs of all the different departments.
Right. And as I just pointed out earlier, right, he's a part of every one of our subcommittee meetings right now. And I just want to point out officially, just for everybody clarification, anybody who's watching this, right? Every board, to Dan's point, every department in town has a reporting structure that ultimately gets to the town administrator or the finance committee directly, right? If it's an elected board that is not under the purview of the select board, they can come to us directly, they can come to the subcommittee directly, and they can go to the town administrator, which is what they do now anyway, because he's doing this function for us, right? But all other boards or committees, parks, everything else that's under the purview of the select board officially reports through the select board. And to Dan's point, the finance committee has always had a policy, at least as long as I've been on there, and probably before, that we consider requests that come from the appropriate oversight board. So if I just use the assessor as an example, if the assessors had a capital request and the principal assessor said, I need to buy something very expensive, they go to the board of assessors, the assessors vote on it. And as the board that does not report to the select board, they would forward the request directly to us and say, we'd like to be considered. Now, under the current subcommittee that's working, that would go to Travis anyway as the coordinator. But the point is that, the Parks Department being under, or whatever, Council on Aging, there are many departments under the select board, they have a capital request that has to go to the select board for review first before it even comes to the finance committee for their oversight board's approval. So to the point about voice, right? Everybody has the voice in their elected board. And right now, the structure is that it goes through that voice, that they are your conduit to getting consideration from the town administrator and the finance committee. So just to be clear, anyway.
So can part B of that question? Because I was trying to get to that. That's all right. That's all right. So when this board would meet, and so if you're, someone, any of those members from, or any of those boards that Ken was talking about, could go to these 5 people and propose a capital investment to the town. And then that committee is going to vote on it. And you said then they're going to present their recommendations to the finance committee. And is it just the finance committee, or are they also going to present recommendations to the select board, since you have a bunch of people that, I guess help me with that. Like, is it going in multiple directions, or is it just everything going to the finance committee?
This is Sam. First of all, based on the town administrator bylaw, the town administrator is responsible for compiling the capital budget. So the capital planning committee will be doing its work, coming up with the recommendations, submits those recommendations to the town administrator. They'll also do it to the finance committee. The town administrator presumably will share that with the select board. And that becomes part of the sort of the comprehensive operating and capital budget that would then be submitted to the finance committee for their recommendations.
And that's not what it says here.
For their recommendations. So that's the role of the finance committee. You recommend.
But Sam, you're not reading the
recommendations to town meeting. You don't have the authority to correct the.
Sam, it has nothing to do with the select board and the bylaw you proposed to us. It says it shall advise the town administrator and the FinCom. Select board's not even mentioned at all.
But the select board is the
But it
town
doesn't say
administrative
anything.
bylaw
Okay,
does make the town administrator responsible for compiling the capital budget. And it doesn't say that it then sends it just to the finance committee. It also,
it says it shall advise the town administrator and the finance committee.
yeah, so the town administrator is certainly going to share it with the select board, just
Okay,
as part of, you know,
but you're,
Wait, so the town administrator and the select board are basically the same? No.
yeah.
no,
So,
Okay, let's not go there. Let's stay on point. So, Jay, were you finished?
I'm good. I'm good. One question, Vin, are you looking at the document or are you looking at
Yeah,
something
I'm
else?
looking at B. I'm looking at the last sentence of section B, duties and responsibilities. It says, it
Okay.
shall advise the town administrator and the finance committee.
All right, thank
So
you.
Yeah. So there's nothing involving the select board at all.
Okay.
And we're not
I'm
gonna
done,
go
Ken.
back
Thank
down
you.
the
Okay, so-
rabbit
so,
hole of
let's
compiling, please.
try to stay on point here. So, Joan, you were patiently waiting.
Thank you. I wonder whether we can flip this on its head and say, dear Finance Committee, do you see any challenges, weaknesses, room for improvement in the current capital planning process? Because from an outside perspective, and I'm hearing what you're saying, and maybe this should be a strategic capital planning committee, because if all the stakeholders were to get together, much like the tri-board meeting that we had several years ago that helped us formulate the current capital plan, if all the stakeholders would get together and talk about their needs together, people can see, oh, the schools really need this because of this. The park and rec really needs this because of this. It is almost as, and I understand that you're saying the FinCom holds this role, but the FinCom is not as, can't by nature be content experts in every silo. Get them together at a table and have them discuss it. Oh, well, the fire truck can wait another year if we do this. That kind of stuff could be recommended by the FinCom, but there could be very valid reasons why the FinCom's recommendation would not be applicable, and that would be too granular in a 20-minute presentation to the FinCom. Do you see what I'm saying? So I guess my question is twofold. Number one, does the FinCom feel as though the current practice is perfectly fine the way it is and there's no room for improvement? That's the first one, my first question. And the second question is, please identify for me a drawback to getting all the stakeholders in the room and discussing it and coming to adult decisions about what is best for the town holistically, because that's what we've all been elected to do. Well, I haven't been elected to anything, but you know what I'm saying.
So, okay, so I just will make one comment on that, which is, I think you do a disservice to the Finance Committee in general in saying that we don't have the ability to get the expertise, right? We don't make decisions in a vacuum. We never have. So, well, I mean, just from the point
I
of view,
wasn't
what I'm saying is
intimating that. What I'm saying is that the content
everything.
can't be that granular by nature.
Right, but to answer your first question, I think that the process, for a long time, the process was broken. If you asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have said it's completely broken, right? I think that once we got the subcommittee, I mean, for many years, there wasn't even a subcommittee, right? It was really about 3-4 years ago, we fired it up again. And of course, that was a time when we didn't have Travis and we didn't have a strong town administrator. I think that where we are now is actually a very good place, right? Meaning to your point about the expertise, this is exactly what the subcommittee does. Travis compiles the requests and we have a subcommittee meeting with the facilities manager, with the appropriate people from different boards, you know, as I said, school committee, whatever. And Travis is compiling all that per his job function, right? We go through each one and when necessary, we get the expertise we need, right? If it's something where
If you think it's necessary.
well, not just
Therein
me,
is the rub.
right?
Therein lies the rub. If you think it's necessary, but what would be the drawback to getting the stakeholders together and making a recommendation to the finance committee, to whatever appropriate board? What would be the drawback?
Well, the drawback that I see is that I see it. I mean, it's not that it's a drawback. I just see it adds no value. That's my point, right?
Oh,
If the school
so
committee,
the Park and Rec being at the table to talk about their own capital planning needs doesn't add
You do
value.
that now.
no. Don't twist my words, Joan. Okay.
What you just
Right
said.
now, what happens right now is Travis would compile a list of requests from everybody, right? From the Parks and Rec, from everybody else. He comes to the subcommittee and he says, here's the list of requests I gathered from everybody in town, all the boards. Again, they're making recommendations based on their expertise. Parks and Rec is making things that they recommend. School committee is giving their priority list based on what they recommend for the schools. Has nothing to do with the finance committee's expertise, right? Goes to Travis, he presents that list, and with that, Travis gives his opinion of, okay, this is what I think based on the information I have, right? And then we have that discussion. And 99 times out of 100, we arrange to have all the people that gave that information come in to talk to us and talk to the subcommittee instead of going just directly to the full finance committee, so that we have that committee with everybody there. So my point is that that's why I said it's the implication that we're not getting that expertise is not really correct, right? There have been many times when Travis himself will say, I got this request, and somebody will say, well, I don't understand this request. And Travis will say, okay, I'll go contact them and have them come in and we'll talk about it. So I'm just saying that, again, 10 years ago, I would have said absolutely not, right? That town administrator you had back then was terrible. No, just kidding. But as I said, I think that right now it is actually working better than it ever has. And that's because when Travis came in and when we got the subcommittee really going for real and, that kind of thing, it's been working extremely well. I'm not saying, I will never say that something couldn't use improvement, right? As time goes by, you identify where you can make improvements and you make them, right? But I as I said, I just don't see where you're solving a problem that is currently a problem. So
Here's the challenge. The language says that the list shall be determined by the FinCom. All I'm saying is that, is there not value to having the stakeholders gather together, much like we did in the tri-board meeting, that those were 3 executive boards. I'm talking about stakeholder boards, unless you want to commit to tri-board meetings biannually.
well, we could commit to that, but I guess what I'm saying is I don't get it, because Scott can attest, he was on the finance committee. We never once considered a capital request. It didn't have the requester come before us and explain why they wanted it and give us the details that were needed. So go ahead, Scott.
If I may, and I'll put Travis on the spot. Travis, would a committee like this be helpful to you as you make recommendations to the finance committee?
Doing what Joan did on town meeting floor. Yeah, I think the benefit of what we're talking about, right? The system that we're going through, Vin's chairing it now, Tim did it last year. I think, to the point that's been made, we're getting everybody in front of the group. I think, I believe it was Scott's point earlier, right, is that at the end of the day, what we're doing is having the capital subcommittee, which is a group of finance committee members, then, essentially pass their feedback on to the finance committee for the recommendation. It's not that that's not valuable. I think the value in what, you're discussing and potentially changing or creating a body to do is probably more to look holistically and long-term outside of the vetting process that we're doing, I think, effectively through the current model. So I think everything that the chair mentioned earlier, I think Vin as well can attest to the group, that we've been going through now, right? We're vetting it properly. People are being given a chance to explain their requests. The right questions are being asked. I think what this group, the way that I'm viewing the language, and I did in May, and I view it with what I was given recently, the value in it would be saying, not just what are we talking about this year, but what are we talking about, where are we going in the next 10 years, and planning all those things around it. Right now, I'm trying to do that, and those questions are being asked from the select board and the finance committee. I would see this body in that role. and really advancing us in that role. Again, not that, the way that we're reviewing capital requests is not effective. I think it is. But that's the benefit I think the town, that the town could get out of what's being proposed.
Thank you.
Okay, so let me go through the list of questions here, and then I want to try to wrap this up, because I know you guys have a separate meeting of your own to deal with, and we have other stuff to deal with too. So Vin, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if anybody's actually watched any of our meetings, the capital subcommittee meeting. They're fun, you can watch it. It's on. We have one this Friday, but you can also watch the recording, so you get a sense of what the meetings are like. It's not us dictating this is what the budget's going to be. I think a long term, getting the votes and getting information from others makes good. Maybe we have two separate, or we think about having something else. I think I have a problem with the timing of this. This is coming before us on the 14th, and you're saying that you have a deadline of the 20th. I think it goes back to, well, we should have been talking about this at the beginning of the summer, not 6 days before your deadline, so we can talk through this thing. So those are the few things I have.
Okay, Ben.
Thank you. I'm not going to chime in on my opinion about any of this stuff. I just had two questions. They were sort of asked somewhat by Travis and by Joan. They kind of alluded to some of it, but I think it needs to be asked to both the governance committee and the finance committee. Whether it's answered tonight, I don't know. But just a little background, I was pushing the capital subcommittee last year to put forward a report to sort of look at a long-term planning of capital in Holliston. I think there needs to be a mechanism by which long-term planning can take place, because if there's something like a new roof for a school and a fire truck, we're probably not going to be able to do both in the same year, but we need to have some sort of a mechanism to be able to vet those pieces. And we need to be able to have, as often as possible, the stakeholders as part of that vetting process to be able to say, I can wait a year, I cannot wait a year. So my questions, the two questions I have is, who should be doing the long-term planning for capital and creating these long-term plans? Travis is compiling the data, and he's done a lot of that, but to a certain extent, there needs to be additional elected officials who are coming in and being able to say, this is where we need to move, this is what we need to do, and this is what we need.
Can I answer that one, Ben?
Hold on, let me ask my second question. Joan kind of alluded to that. And then the second question is funding. For example, if we're talking about a DPW facility and we're going to we're talking about putting it within the levy, if it's going to be exclusion, if it's going to be paid for in cash, like we paid for the streetlights a few years ago through free cash, I think there should be some sort of a mechanism, or we need to address who is responsible for making those kinds of choices in the community. Is it the capital subcommittee? Probably not. Is it the finance committee? Is it another group? I think there needs to be some additional input from other stakeholders as often as possible. And that's my 2 cents. But I think those questions need to be addressed. And I think, to me, the capital subcommittee as it's currently constructed is what it's doing is excellent at vetting, doing a great job, but I think it needs to take that additional step, or there needs to be a different mechanism to do so. So those are my
Okay, and I just want to clarify, just to be clear, right? The construction of the long-term capital plan is a responsibility of the town administrator. Okay, so and that's what Travis has been working on. Travis has been working on a 5-year plan and things like that. He's not there yet. He's still got a lot of work to do on that. But that's why I wanted to answer that specifically. That is under his responsibilities as a town administrator, is to put together a long-term capital plan. Paul used to do that when he was town administrator. I remember that. We used to sit down every year and he'd show me the giant spreadsheet of the next 20 years, right? So and to your point about where does he get the input? Well, that's his responsibility to get that input. And that's, again, to Travis's credit, that's what he's been doing, right? He's reaching out to every department and saying, let's talk. And he's been sitting down with them and gathering that info. And that's exactly why I said, I'm not sure where it's broken per se, because that's a town administrator role. It's not the finance committee's role. As to who makes the decisions as to the money, that ultimately is town meeting, right? And that's why I want to be perfectly clear. Finance committee makes recommendations, town meeting appropriates. So yes, we'll always have a role in making recommendations. Town meeting is always the final approver. Travis, in my mind, again, my mind at least, is the owner of the 5-year plan, and his goal is to own and maintain it. And you know from when he arrived, right? One of the first things we said to him on the capital subcommittee was, we have this Collins Center work that looked out 5 years and 10 years, and we want you to take it and own it because we need somebody to own it, and that's technically your job. And our former town administrator didn't do that. So just to answer your question. But anyway, I want to wrap this up. So we'll take the last couple of questions here, and then we'll let you guys go off to your own meeting and ponder the universe. Go ahead, Michelle.
I just want to say that I'm not talking about the last year with Travis, but in the past, we've always had a problem, and Joan can confirm this, where we'll get a list of approved capital from like the schools or all of the boards under the select board. And we'll say to the select board, or we'll say to the schools, could you give us, this is a huge list, could you please prioritize this for us? And the answer will be, no, we can't. And that's always been a problem for us, because then,
we always did, Michelle.
No.
We always did. Not capital is different than operating. Operating, we pushed back because we thought that was overreach, but capital was completely different, completely separate.
Capital hasn't always been prioritized, though. It's always been.
I'll give the schools credit on this one. They haven't always prioritized it, but they've prioritized when we've asked. So I'll defend them on that one because they have. They always give us their priority one list. What I think you're talking about is within their priority one list, there are sometimes when we say, hey, we can't fund all of priority one, so what would you pick within that? And then they say, well, sometimes they'll say this is most important, this is least important. Other times they'll say, well, they're all equally important. So do what you can.
Right.
So.
But the select board, will say there'll be just this huge list. And I understand to them, maybe police, fire, COA, all of those, they are all equally important, but then we'll have to be the ones to cut it. And sometimes
to make a recommendation. That's just be clear.
Right, to make a recommendation to town meeting, a budget to town meeting. And that is hard. So when I see then, this suggested warrant article of everyone coming to a table, it's hard for me to imagine when people can't even prioritize for them to sit at a table and agree. It's just hard for me to imagine when they can't even prioritize their own budgets. It's just, I don't know.
That'll bring about some self-reflection, won't it?
No.
I think that this is a mechanism to bring it close, to bring the whole capital planning process to the voter and to more transparent, because and it'll support Travis.
Yeah. Okay.
Because right now, if Travis is doing everything, and that is outside of the open meeting law, that is not discussed and debated, like what his choices are, and an independent group that would vote and then present it, and maybe their recommendation should go alongside the FinCom's in the warrant.
Well, whatever, but I would, just to defend Travis on this one, everything that Travis does, I agree entirely. He's not subject to the open meeting law because he'd have to post for his office every day. But but he does present all of his findings to the capital subcommittee, and a lot of them also go to the select board because they affect select board departments. So you're correct that his day-to-day activities are not subject to the open meeting law, but I think the information is presented in forums that are public record. So anyway, Jay, last word, and then let's wrap this up so that they can get on to their meeting. You're on mute, Jay.
Thank you, Ken. Two questions in a statement, and hopefully with quick answers. So is this proposal to augment the finance committee's capital subcommittee or replace?
Replace. It's to replace it. Thinking
okay.
This would be the capital planning committee for the town, and there would be no need for a separate program.
Okay, so to replace, got it. So the statement is, now stepping back, as a citizen, when I was sitting at the little kids table with Joan, I think it was last October, I will tell you as a citizen prior to joining this board, there were a lot of people around me, and personally, I can speak for myself. It was confusing what was presented to the town. And I spoke to folks. I spoke to Mary Greendale, and she said it's pretty simple, and she stated her view. I'm like, that's great, Mary, but I didn't hear any of that. I heard a lot of information, but at the end of that whole discussion, I felt like I knew less than at the beginning of the discussion. So because if we're going to put this in October, I would just tell you just personally, not as a finance committee member, but as a citizen, it was confusing last fall. So whatever you present, I would say make it simple and make it clear. Like, for instance, what I just described, or my question, like you're looking to replace, not augment. And the other thing is, so what happens if we're going to push this through, right? It feels like a rush job, speaking for myself, not the finance committee. What if it doesn't pass? What happens next? Because my concern is like pushing this through. If it's unclear to the citizens and it doesn't get passed, does that mean that now you have to wait 2 years, like versus waiting till May and maybe having more rounds of this or what have you? But like, I'm just trying to understand like what happens if it doesn't pass.
I guess it's a question for Sam.
Yeah, for the committee or whoever. Yeah, right, Ken.
So Sam, I think that we regroup and figure out what we're going to do for May in terms of the town administrator position and what else we might add to that. I don't think there's any reason for us to not be able to continue to pursue something that we think the town needs.
You didn't answer his question, though. He's asking what specifically is going to happen with this article. And from my understanding, and maybe Travis can chime in, it's once it gets voted down, it can't come back to the floor for another 2 years.
That's what I thought. That's what like Vin's articulating better what I didn't want to say.
Yeah, generally, I think what you're referring to is related to like zoning, right? When we bring in zoning and it gets voted down, it can't go back for 2 years. And I don't think this is a direct correlation. I would say just obviously I didn't bring this and I'm just watching a lot of an hour and 15 minutes of conversation on this that, I think part of the thinking here was that, the governance committee is coming to you with something that they thought was, could get everybody agreement on and go to town meeting on that. I don't want to speak for the governance committee, but I mean, it sounded to me like that was their approach here, was something that, whereas there was not full agreement on everything in the article that did not pass in May, that this one, could have received support from a variety of different sources. So, again, I think the point that was made previously, as soon as I have the DLS tab report, I'll get it to everybody. I think to a point that I believe Sam made earlier, right? If that completely contradicted what the governance committee is putting forward, certainly that would be, could be put into the conversation. But, if there's discussion and to, I think what Joan said earlier, right? If you don't see any way to improve our approach to capital, then, I mean, that might be the answer to the conversation of whether the governance committee can get support from the finance committee. But the governance committee still needs to do its job. And if it feels like it needs to put something forward, to Jay's question, I think that's their call to make. Just my two thoughts. But I think what you're specifically referring to, and the fact that it would then, not be able to come back to town meeting for 2 years, I'd be happy to get a legal opinion on. But I believe, what you're referring to is generally specifically for zoning.
We probably should at least have that conversation, because if it's not supposed to do that, I mean, this technically was voted down as part of the warrant from last year. So we just wouldn't want something to go to town meeting and then have a whole debate on it and only to have it struck down by the AG anyway.
I think we owe it to the town to figure this out. And for me, I was listening, thinking augment, and it's really replace, which I know I'm the new kid in town. That's a pretty significant ask. I've been on both sides of the transaction with the finance committee. So I would say there are comments that the finance committee has made, or my peers, that resonates with me. and there are also comments that I've heard from the other committee that also resonate with me. But frankly, like I'm like begging now as a finance committee member, like, please let's not redo what we did in October. And I was in the little kids table. This time I'm not. Like, let's make sure like we get it together, because that's what the citizens are expecting. And that's like everybody, including myself.
Jay, I know it feels like it was probably last October, but this is just May.
Yeah.
It's all, especially with COVID.
Yeah, don't you guys ever take a town meeting off? You know?
It's just, it's just 4 months ago.
Yeah.
It feels like an eternity. So yeah, thank you for the correction, Dan.
No worries.
Okay, so I think that, you know, we can have further discussion if you want, but I think that, you know, you've gotten a feel for what some of the concerns are. And I know you guys have your own meeting to go to, and we have other business to attend to. So we'll let you go at this point. And if you want to talk to us again, you know, if you have any further discussion, why just let me know, Sam, and we can have another, we can continue this discussion.
Right, okay.
And but for now, what do you have? Do you have to, I don't think you have to vote, but I think you have to separate into a different.
Do we have another call-in number, Sam? Because this is the only one I saw.
No, there's two. Yeah, on the agenda, there's two.
Okay.
Not on our agenda, just to be clear.
Yeah, I got to pull it up. I thought it was the same number. Thanks. I'll find it.
Thank you for putting us on your agenda tonight, and thank you for the lively discussion. You've given us a lot to think about.
Yeah, thanks for
you. It was a lively one.
And Joan, thank you for making me not the only woman on the.
I just texted Stacy. I'm like, there are too many men.
Hey,
Scott, the governance committee agenda has one at the top and then one mid-page. So if you go on the calendar, you have a second one that you'll go to.
Great, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for everybody in the governance committee.
I'm assuming that we don't need to have a roll call to.
No, you don't, because your meeting's continuing. I'm just saying
the meeting. Okay.
And there is another woman on the finance committee. She's just not here.
Yes. So
Thanks, Dan. I didn't want to say that.
Lovely to see you, Dan.
Well,
Lovely to see you all.
We'll regroup in a few minutes, and thanks for your time.
All right. Bye, Mark.
Bye, John. Bye, Sam. Bye, Paul.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. See you tomorrow, Paul.
Yep.
You can leave now, Paul.
No, he's going to turn off his camera and make it so he can listen in, but he doesn't think we're not.
He's having too much fun.
Sam told him stay behind and hear what they really think. Not just
Yeah. Well, by the way, just to support what Travis said, the 2-year prohibition on reconsidering a vote at town meeting, that's related to zoning. And there's even an exception to the 2 years. The planning board can endorse reconsideration sooner than 2 years. It doesn't have anything to do with general bylaws.
See, well, can I ask you a question since you're on the governance committee then, before you go to your meeting? Maybe you should put a bylaw in for that so that you guys can get off our back for a while.
Well,
in the sense, I'm in all seriousness, right? That might be a procedural thing we want to put in our bylaws to say if something is voted down by town meeting, there's a 1-year moratorium on bringing it back or something like that, just to codify that. So that, not with regards to the governance committee, but just in general, right? You don't want to create a situation where somebody just keeps coming back.
Well, can I ask a stupid question then? Because I'm good at those. What is the difference then between voting down a measure and voting for indefinite postponement? Then I mean, that's why I always sort of thought that there would be some difference to sort of the outcome.
There's where the difference is with zoning.
Just with zoning,
right? And I think, again, I have to double check. It may be even more specific to a proposal to rezone an area or a parcel from one category to another. But in any event, that's the importance between indefinite postponement and an up or down vote when it comes to zoning. Because if you take an up or down vote and it's voted down, then that two-year rule kicks in, with the exception of the planning board.
Well, if that's true, we should change everything and basically put, indefinite postponement, the motion, indefinite postponement in parentheses saying only for zoning bylaws, so we don't have like all these extra votes that we have to sometimes go through.
Well, as I said, personally, I know that with state ballot questions, they have limitations on bringing things back. Like if you bring a ballot question, I'm pretty sure it's 2 years or more. Like if you get a ballot question on the statewide ballot and it gets voted down, you can't bring that question back for some time period, right? So there's a part of me that says, I think procedurally that would actually be a good thing to prevent, not this specific instance, but just in general. You don't want to create a situation where somebody just keeps coming back every town meeting and getting voted down. It's like there should be something that says if you get a no vote, that should mean something. It should be respected for some time period.
Well, there was an attorney in Holliston many years ago who used to represent clients on matters that came to town meeting, various things, not just zoning. And inevitably, he would lose. And it got to the point where somebody would say, well, hiring him to represent you at town meeting is a kiss of death. So, but I don't know if you want to prohibit bringing things back to town meeting. I think that tramples on my First Amendment rights to waste everybody's time whenever I feel like it.
You mean and bring non-binding citizens petitions?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think we should have an article on the town meeting warrant in October and express an opinion about the recall election in California. I mean, I think it's critical.
Well,
yes.
Natick did that, or was it Natick or Wellesley did that about the presidential election or something? Didn't they have something on that?
Yeah, I'm sure that went over like a lead balloon.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, yeah, but I think an indefinite postponement on other issues besides zoning is being more polite. And I think it's expressing an openness to reconsider the issue in the future. And if you vote it down, then you're saying, hey, get out of here. So
I'll just remind you on that note that there was a no vote in May. So just
yeah, I understood. But there also were many favorable comments about the Capital Planning Committee back in May. So
yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay. Have fun, Paul. Okay. So now that we're an hour and a half into a 5-minute discussion that Sam promised me, okay. So let's take care of next up on the agenda, which is, I believe, the town administrator. Let me pull it up here. Yep. The update from the town administrator. Now, the town administrator, of course, will be keeping in mind that he is lengthening his day and ours by going on for a very long time here. So go ahead, Travis.
I'm not sure I'm the one who's going to make your meeting long, but all right. Just a couple things I'll go through, and then the warrant is closing on the 20th, so I'll have a draft relatively soon, even if it's going to be the bare bones for the select board on the 20th, and then probably more closer to completion on the 27th for their meeting. There's a couple of things we went through last night, and Jay was there, so he may have already updated you, so just hit him. I did get a group together to review the reports we have on the dams. Those are from 2 previous town meeting warrants. We had Leonard Engineering get us in compliance with the state on our dam reporting and emergency action plans. The emergency action plans come with recommendations on next steps. Some of them are practices, and some of them are ways to deal with the poor classification of a few of these. We got a gentleman, there's actually the chair of the CONCOM is on this working group. We sat down, the sustainability director, conservation agent, CONCOM rep, Tina Hine, and myself. We reviewed essentially what we got back from Leonard. And at this point, before we can really, bring something to the select board and have a community conversation, we are looking for a little bit more of a cost benefit analysis that was not in the scope of getting us back in compliance. We don't know if Leonard is going to be the answer to that, or there's a couple other firms that could do that work. PAR is one of them. Fuss and O'Neill's another one. So I believe based on what is remaining in previous authorizations, we should be able to engage, get a cost benefit analysis, and then bring that back, hopefully well in advance, to have a public conversation before May. And that's where I am at the moment. I don't think this is going to affect October. The town council workshop for September 29th on Wednesday was originally intended to be in person, a seminar in town hall, upper town hall. I'm getting feedback from boards and committees. Some people are more interested in meeting in person. Some people like to stay with Zoom, as you all have. So Jay Talman has agreed to do that via Zoom. I think we'll do it hybrid if people want to come, and then also have it available as Zoom. I was wondering if he'd be comfortable with that, and he was. So we talked about those last night. The warrant development I already covered, and I can answer any questions if you have them. Moving ahead next week, and I'll show you just briefly where I am with the warrant. One of the items will be in front of the select board next week is a public hearing on a road acceptance. If you have seen these road acceptances in the past, generally speaking, the cost related to them is we're now going to add them to the bus pickup. We're now going to take care of snow and ice. And a few of them, there's drainage, and a few of them are more complicated than others when it comes to drainage. This is the Highlands subdivision, which is by a developer named Fafford. We have 2 right now that have not been accepted for roads. Highlands is the one that has gotten through the punch list with our DPW and our planning board. There's a couple items that the select board is going to have to put in this conversation, but otherwise we're comfortable with the way the roads are, and we would like those residents to have access to town services, provided we can get the developer and the board is comfortable. So we'll have the public hearing on that on the 20th. Provided that goes forward, that would end up on the warrant for discussion, and you can all weigh in on that if there's financial components that you're concerned about, and I'll get you that language when I have it. I think it was already mentioned previously in a robust conversation, the DLS tab, I'm expecting any day. I just sent another reminder to them that, people are waiting with bated breath. So that's all I have at the moment. I can get into the warrant, but I understand you're getting into financial policies. So, next week is going to be the time to be more in depth. So it's really up to you if you'd like me to pull that up. And I see a hand as well.
Okay, yeah, Vin, go ahead, and then
I just have a question regarding the dams. What's the price tag are they thinking to get everything? Forget the cost benefit, but just from a total cost, real dollars going out.
Right. So that's what I'm looking for, right?
Oh.
The way that these things essentially, the way that we can approach all of these, and the way that, if you think about it status quo, which is to essentially ignore the problem forever, is essentially called breach. The other one is to remove the dam, which means you have to do quite a bit of planning because that water is going somewhere. And then the other one is to repair and the capital costs on that. I don't have a number to throw out at you. That's one of the things we would be looking for a price tag on all 3 of those options for the 3 dams. And if I had to rank them from poor to, not keeping me up at night, is Houghton Pond, Factory Pond, and Winthrop. Winthrop is a little bit complicated in the ownership between us and the state, but at the end of the day, we are going to be responsible for it. The last one is Weston Pond, which is less of a concern and only needs to be factored in every 10 years for a report. And so what we would be looking for is the cost of breach, repair, replace for all 3 of those to be able to bring that back and have a realistic conversation on how we want to proceed.
Sorry, I just hit send on the notes. Like, that meeting was a killer last night and an early day today. So John Cronin also asked if we don't do something, would our insurance cover us if there was a breach? If there was an event, and Travis said that we would still be covered from an insurance perspective, right? So we wouldn't be on the hook if, like, there was damage. We have insurance to cover it. That would be unfortunate if we let it get to that point, but we're not on the hook to pay for any damages.
But the town has gone through, I believe it was in the last 10 years, behind Dunkin' Donuts, which is the Houghton Pond Dam. There was a significant amount of water and there was some damage. So there have been Maya claims in the past related to these. At this point, what we're doing from a DPW perspective is when issues are exacerbated with beavers and things like that, we have, beaver deceivers, which are much more complicated than they sound. And we have the staff who goes out there, but at the end of the day, the question is going to be really in the long run, a full reconstruction, repair, or most likely, or not most likely. One of the 2 options most likely would be the repair or the removal. The breach is, at some point the state isn't going to allow you to do that. So anyway, but what we're looking to do, Vin, is answer that question, and that's what I'm going to get the next engagement on.
Just a word of advice, don't come back and say you just need $40,000 to do a report, because we paid for like 4 of those so far, and everyone has not gone to anything step 2. So.
Well, no, that's not true. The town was out of compliance with the state on these dams because this is the problem. Where we are now, in terms of $40,000, is that every 6 months we're going to have to report to the state on why our dams are poor and what we've done with them, which is nothing. And so we are going to just be having $40,000 every other year.
No, and that's exactly my point. Right? We've been, every time the $40,000 article comes up, it's to figure out what we have to do so we can get it done, and then it just disappears. And then the next time we hear about it, it's another $40,000 to figure out what we have to do.
It also keeps us in compliance. We need to do the study and then, they'll give us anyway. But at this point, I believe based on those previous authorizations, I should be able to get the information on the cost benefit analysis to have that conversation before we would put an article in front that would hopefully be more of an action plan.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And breaching the dams right now is not a good idea. I'm just kidding. Okay, good. And the other thing I was going to just tell you, Travis, from our point of view is when the warrant closes next week, it would be nice to, I know the select board will still have work to do on it, but it would be nice to see, to get a first look at what, these things that you're talking about, just to see okay, this is what the warrant looks like right now as closed. And we'll wait for the select board to do their massaging, but at least give us a head up. To Ben's earlier point earlier this year about, you want us to take action quicker, then let's start looking at things earlier. So,
yeah. And that's what I mean. I can show you essentially based on their conversation last night, a couple of things got removed. And now I have essentially a structure of a 20 article, which may come down more towards 17.
Right. But that's why I said, since it's still open, right? Wait till it closes, and then next Tuesday you can show us and say, this is what we're looking at right now. And again, select board always has the ability to change it or, whatever, but at least we can start talking about which articles we can talk about before, that we know aren't going to go anywhere. So okay. So you're all set, Travis? Okay, good. Okay. Let's get into the policy document. Now, Dan, do you want to share first? Okay. So
you want to share? You have the copy. You can.
Okay. So I was going to say, just to tell you where there are only a few minor changes from the last time we talked that I would suggest. I looked through it and I talked to Travis about some of this, and let me see, let me go back, let me get it up here, hold on. So let me just share it. Now, of course I have it blocking my share button. There we go. Here we go. Okay, now hopefully it's sharing. Let me see. Okay, share. There we go. So you guys see this? Okay, can you guys see it? Just want to make sure. Okay, good. Okay, so the only things that I would recommend changing, and this is after talking with Travis yesterday, there was all this language we had down here about the plan. Dan and I talked to Travis yesterday and said, look, let's try to work something out here, figure out what makes sense. I think we're all in agreement that the policy wants to be that we get to a point where we're 3 to 5% of the omnibus. That's good financial practice. So I just changed the same as I had before, but I just added 3 to 5% here as the policy, that's our policy goal. For the plan, what I changed, I got rid of a lot of the text and just changed it to say, town will increase the annual capital set aside over the next 2 years until the next plan revision to achieve the minimum 3% policy level, since there are currently no capital debt payments within the levy limit. Okay, and then just say we'll maintain the 5-year document, updated annually. That's all the same as before. So I just took out a lot of the stuff that Dan had and said replace it with this that says that and just as a reminder, if you look at progress, we're at 2.8%. Maybe it's about 2.7 something percent now, because as FY22 is the same level, and the budget's gone up a little bit. But we're very close to 3. So the goal is to say, okay, our plan is over the next 2 years, we try to get to 3. And then, as I said, it does specify in here, by the way, in case anybody's wondering, some of the appropriation of capital and the appropriation to fund capital debt within the levy. So this is that amount, get it to 3% within the next 2 years. And then 2 years from now, we can talk about where we are, what the financial condition looks like, whether we want to, how we want to go from there. Maybe at that time we have the water treatment plant, or we have some other thing, so DPW building or something we're going to put within the levy limit. So that's that. So I just simplified that language, or I'd recommend that we simplified that language. And then under OPEB, I wanted to make it clear, because I know there were concerns, under the pension, right? We had this whole discussion about the 1.5 million, the 2033 funding. I did go back and verify that in the 2014 valuation, it did have the 2033 as the funding schedule. So, in talking to Travis, we were discussing free cash and where we expected free cash to be. So I changed this, and actually I should have highlighted this sentence too, to basically say, the plan is going to be apply the credits to the pension fund, use the free cash to ensure a minimum of 250 is contributed to the pension fund each year. And then should the trust committee, the select board, finance committee agree that less than 1.5 million is needed to meet the 2033 funding schedule, take the difference and put that at the pension fund. Now, I just want to remind people, we revisit this again in 2 years. So this is for the next 2 years. We put at least 250 in, and then 2 years from now, we'd have another look at the OPEB trust. We could decide where we want to go from there and possibly revise this plan as necessary. But this guarantees that we get the $1.5 million towards the OPEB, and we put the minimum of 250 that Travis was looking for in the pension fund each year. So that's really the only two language clarifications I mentioned. Now, Travis had mentioned, and I don't know if you want to cover this or you want me to say something about Travis, but he had some not concerns, but he was talking about possibly adding a section on cannabis revenue and taking that out of, right now it goes in the general fund. We all agree that it's not really the best idea because it's not stable revenue and it's not recurring, and we're getting these payments that will tail off and so forth. So he was asking whether we'd be amenable to adding a section to create essentially a fund for that, where that revenue would go. I personally don't have a problem with it. I think that's fine. I asked him to suggest the language he'd want to put in the policy document to that effect. So, but anyway, let's talk about these first two. If everybody's fine with these first two, I think, we're good there. And then I'll let Travis talk about what he wants to do with the cannabis revenue. So,
Ben?
Okay, go ahead, Ben.
Can we go back to the other one? The cap, the 3 to 5. I have a problem because it's ambiguous.
Okay, which one? Okay.
You give me a range. Minimum's not a range, in my opinion. You should just say amount, percentage.
Okay, which are you talking about, the top one or the bottom?
No, the top one. The minimum should be between 3 and 5%.
Okay, you're right. I should take out the word minimum. Yes.
Yeah.
Correct. Good call. Okay.
Can I just add that on any of these? So my point is also, again, the 5, I'm not necessarily comfortable with. The 3, my point was, by making it immediate in FY23, we're tying our hands, right? Getting to it, I think, is a reasonable goal.
Yeah, well, that's why, that's why I said over the next 2 years.
Yeah, I'm just clarifying my point on that. And the 5, I don't think we can get to, but the 3%, just not immediate. Other than that, I was comfortable with the goal.
Okay. So you good, Vin?
Well, based on that, should we put something about that? Like the goal to be similar to the way it was before?
Meaning the goal, well, that's why I put it up here, right? I said the policy that we have is to be 3 to 5%, right? So the goal, we're not at 3% yet. So the plan for the next 2 years is get to 3% at least. Okay. But then 2 years.
Then we're breaking our policy.
No, you're saying is by not doing it in 1 year?
Yeah. I mean, if you have a policy, the policy is X and we're not meeting it, then we're outside of the policy.
Correct. That's true. But the plan is to get to the minimum policy level in 2 years.
And
so to get back into compliance, or do we say something like that to Vin's point of
this is the goal to get to, as opposed
right. Well, that's why, just to be clear, that's why it says here to achieve the minimum 3% policy level.
But that's not how I'm reading that. I'm reading that's what our minimum is. It's not, we have a goal to get to. Do you follow what I'm trying to say? Because the policy.
I know what you're saying, but I'm trying to figure out where the wording isn't clear.
Because you're saying the policy is the annual capital outlay and appropriate to fund shall be 3 to 5%. You can probably put, if we're not there at 3%, we should put something, the goal to be a minimum of 3% or 3 to 5 or to get to.
If they're wordsmithing, don't do shall, because shall means it should.
Yeah.
It should be to be. Like you're not hitting your target. You're signing up for something that you're already missing.
Yes.
So
you got to crouch it so that we have a flexibility. So we already know we're not meeting the target. Our goal is to be meeting, to get
should
to.
Be increased to. I'm sorry, I keep talking over you.
Nope, that's fine.
How about should be increased to 3 to 5% of the omnibus budget.
Well, hold it. Let me just clarify one thing here. This is the policy, right? So it should be 3 to 5%. If the issue is that we're not compliant, right, then in the plan, we should say, we are currently not compliant. To reach the minimum, the town will increase the annual, in other words, my point is that we all agree we're not compliant. That's why we're saying the plan is to get to the minimum compliance level in 2 years.
Okay, I see that.
Okay.
And I guess the question I would have, and I'll ask Travis, what are the rating agencies, what would they say about that? Since that's our paradigm, is the rating agencies, and we want to make sure we keep the AAA.
Right. I mean, I guess any of these I need to, generally sell, right? This one is very Holliston specific and not in the CapEx, right? So what I'd be saying is, the way that I think that what you're getting to and what Ken is saying are all the same point, but it just needs to be as clear as possible that we understand we're not at 3%. That would be the goal over the life of the next 2 years. And that was the point. That's why I just wanted to make this point, right? So however we want to do that, to be clear, that we understand that we're not in compliance as part of a plan, I can sell a plan to S&P all day long.
Okay. And that's what I want, is to make sure somebody reading this will understand we know what we are. Our goal is we have a target versus we're out of compliance of our policy.
How's that? See what I just added, Vin?
Yep. And I think that makes sense. Travis, Jay?
Yeah, I mean, this resonates with me. Like, this is my daily job, dealing with like CAPAs, right? Corrective action, preventative action. And that's my concern, is that we're going to put a policy together that we're not in compliance
right.
with.
So now we explicitly say
we're
not in compliance. This is our plan to get to compliance.
Yeah, I'm glad, Vin, you brought that up. I'm aligned, and thank you for the language, Ken, because I feel a lot more comfortable.
I don't want to get too wordy, but we're not in compliance because we just increased, right? We just increased it from 2 to 3, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. As long as
that's fine, but just it's for consistency, because we're saying this is what the policy should be, and we're not there. So
you put the
I personally, to your point, Travis, from a rating agency perspective, I don't think they're going to have a problem with this, because they don't even know what to do our capital expenditure fund in the first place, right? Because it is a uniquely Holliston thing. So
it is.
But to Vin's point, by acknowledging that we know we're not compliant and saying this is how we're going to get there, at least they don't look at it and say, hey, they're not there. Right? So we're saying we know we're not there.
So why don't we put the town is not compliant with this newly established goal policy of 3% minimum, newly established, and that's the key. Yeah.
Okay. Sound good?
I think that works.
Okay. Everybody accepting of that? Okay. Jay, you all set? Okay, good. I just wanted to go, sorry, hand up again. Okay, so, and is everybody fine with the OPEB piece?
Yeah, that's where I wanted to go. I'm sorry, I was trying to get off mute.
Yeah.
On the OPEB piece, my concern is the 2033 date. I went and did some homework after our last meeting, and I went through many of the Finance Committee reports to the town, and the Reader's Digest version, and I can show you. I tried to put some notes
together. You don't
together.
have to. I was there. Yeah.
Okay. So the thing is, it's for the first 2 years after we voted that in, it was 2037 is what we were putting in the reports, and after that it goes to we state that we will fund it by continues our commitment to reach full funding by 2040. So there's never in any of the reports that the Finance Committee puts to the town anything about the year 2033, but always asking for $1.5 million. And the other thing was the first report that I could find from the OPEB Trust from 2016 lined up pretty well with 2040 of when OPEB is fully funded. Just one more thing.
Jay, I get your point, and I'll say this. The first valuation that was done after we started the fund was 2033. That's 2014, and I have it. Okay.
Okay.
Yes, there have been
let me finish.
It's varied since then, but in the interest of time, I'll just ask the other members. is a majority of the membership fine with this language? Because if so, I don't want to have another hour-long discussion about it.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm not to shut you down, Jake, but I'm saying I don't want to go down this road of having an hour-long debate about 2037 versus 2033.
There wasn't a debate. I was just sharing. I was told that we made a promise to the town of 2033. There's no evidence of that. I'm done talking about it.
I remember it always being 2033. That was
what's written is not 2033.
Well, as I said, the 2014 report says 2033, but it's again.
And then the
relevant
18 and the 20 show get you closer to 2033 and 2034. So the schedules say one thing, the Word document says something else. I will respect your request, Ken, but I just want to say that we never articulated 2033. Right. There's nothing in any reports.
We can talk more about it in the terms of 1.5, which on the schedules was 2033.
Right. That's what I was saying. That the 1.5 schedule that was used as the basis for the whole thing says 2033, but that's neither here nor there. As I said.
Well, we made a promise to the town, and I'm saying like it doesn't line up. But I'm gonna go on mute. I understand where the rest of you are at.
Okay. So anybody else have any objections? Sounds like a majority are fine with this language. In which case,
do we want to? Does Travis have? Do we have language? Travis?
Well, I was just going to say. So if we're fine with this report as it now stands with with the modified language, first I'll stop sharing. But Travis, do you have suggestions for what you wanted to add vis-a-vis cannabis revenue?
Oh, so yeah, the cannabis revenue. I think the select board. We had a pretty good discussion last night, and I put it to them. A similar conversation. I think there's a few ways to go with it. And when I put this document, the Mary Sharon MI document that we sent to the select board and the finance committee, there was a section at the bottom that essentially said, we haven't touched cannabis here. When we all get together, let's all sort of come to a consensus. I have talked to Kate Federoff, MTC. She's kind of the cannabis guru there. And we will have a cannabis article in October related to a planning board zoning item. So the thought here is there's a local option from 2018. I can send that to everybody if anybody's got questions on it. In fact, I will send it to everybody. So the local option essentially says, you're going to put in the way that it's written is the revenue that's generated through, specific functions within the CCC guidelines. And you can put it into a general stabilization fund. If you accept the local option, there's very limited guardrails. If you accept it, you must put at least 25% into a stabilization fund. You can put it into a general stabilization fund. You could put it into a special purpose stabilization fund. Now, Holliston, unlike some other towns, some towns put a stabilization fund together every time they have a town meeting. We don't have many. We just created the one for the pension. So the idea here that I think the select board was their preference last night was to create a special purpose stabilization fund with an option to adopt the local option to put in the cannabis revenue. Now, I believe that from my understanding of them last night, one thing is that means I'll put together the two articles. I work with Kate on that to adopt a local option. Then we need to determine, are we doing a minimum of 25%? Are we doing up to 100%? I think they were of the mindset of just put it all in, and then a future town meeting can appropriate out of it for the guardrails that are set up. So then the second article would then need to be, and I think this is where the financial policies marry. We need to establish what the guardrails are, and then any future town meeting is just living within those guardrails and determining, if a use in the future lives within those, and it's really up to the town meeting in the future to appropriate out of a stabilization fund as we do elsewhere. So those are essentially where I think the select board is, and I would look for the finance committee feedback on that. And then really, I think if we're ready to finalize the finance documents, then, we can marry it right now. Otherwise, you'll have a chance once I have that language from Kate, really the guardrails that go into the article establishing the special purpose stabilization fund becomes the general guidelines of the finance policy of that fund. My general idea of it would be things that are, our response to drugs in our community. And you look at youth and family services, the schools and police, right? Now, I would want it to be general enough that, if there's creative solutions that the whole community is in favor of in the future, that they could do it. But at the same point, it's more narrow than the general stabilization fund. Otherwise, why would we create a fund? And so that's kind of, again, the article, which you'll be able to weigh in on as the finance committee, would essentially become the guardrails of what that stabilization fund would look like in our finance policies. And then really beyond that, I can't put a lot of specifics in terms of what our goals are, because all of our host community agreements are about to go from set amounts to 3% of wholesale sales after 14 to 18 months of them becoming commercially viable, which, we're not even at yet. So I can't even give you revenue projections on it. So it's really setting up the apparatus, knowing that we're about to get into this variable revenue category.
So would you prefer that we just approve the policy document that we just talked about, and then you'll deal with, as I said, the only thing is I want to get a committee vote on the policy document. And if we're waiting for, if you want to put language in there, we wanted to consider that too. But if you're saying right now you don't want to do that because we have other stuff to do, then we can add it later. That's fine.
Yeah, I think if you're generally comfortable with what I just described, I think we leave a placeholder now. The article essentially becomes, we may fine tune it to be more of a policy than the gibberish we put in a warrant. I mean that lovingly. But, it would be, the guardrails would be the same. And then we're not going to put necessarily goals for the revenue because we don't know exactly what it's going to look like.
Okay. So your expectation would be we set this up, and then in the next policy doc revision, then we put a policy in place for it.
Yes.
Okay. So how does everybody feel about that? Ben, go ahead.
Where's the money going right now? Is it going to some sort of fund, or is it just going
general fund?
The general fund. So right now, and I would make a case, if in the future somebody says that money should not have gone in the general fund, I'll point to the reason that it went to, which was DLS forced our hand.
Yep.
And Sharon can weigh in on that if you'd like to hear from her. But I can also prove out, as a paper exercise, quite frankly, on a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, that every dollar that flowed to free cash was at least put into the general stabilization fund, and we could earmark it if we absolutely had to from a legal perspective. So this isn't saying that what we've done in the past, we did it for the reason that our hand was forced. But moving forward now with this local option, I think if everybody's on the same page, putting it into a fund and then, all understanding what it can be used for in the future may allow us to look at some programs between youth and family services, schools, and police that, we wouldn't necessarily otherwise if we hadn't put this money aside for the purpose.
How much in the past? I know you can't go off of what we've done in the past because everything changes, but just for a reference point for my own mind.
We are in the 5th year of agreements that peaked at $302,500 per year.
In total, the 300.
The annual revenue in FY22 will be $302,500.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So as I said, you look at that, and that would, in theory, would be a free cash reduction of 300,000, which is not a major problem in the sense that the money's going away anyway. So. Okay. So anybody have any other questions about that? Because go Jay.
So we would just quickly, it'll be in the warrant high level. We'll have like a placeholder in the policy. And is it 2 years out before we are more specific in our policy of how that money would be allocated, or would we follow up right after it was voted at town meeting?
I'd say two things. First of all, where there's no statutory obligation that we take 2 years to revise the policy document. So if we established it and then Travis came back, 6 months from now and said, okay, now I'm seeing what's going on. Here's what I propose. We have that discussion. We can add to the document. There's not. We just do a regular review on 2 year cycles. Okay. The other part of that is it's important to remember, and Travis mentioned this, but I don't know if you might not have picked this up. When you establish a stabilization fund, it comes with a set of rules by law. So policy or no, it's not like it just becomes a pot of money and anybody can do what they want with it, right? It requires a 2/3 vote from town meeting to appropriate money from it, things like that. So
I'm aware of that, Ken. That's why
money has some built-in guardrails.
I'm aware of that. That's why I'm wondering, because what I'm thinking at 100,000 feet is it could become a big chunk of money. in the future. And, the sooner we set those guardrails, the better. And by making the warrant, the article in the warrant could be broad, and then we could say that, well, the policy is our guiding principle how to use that money. Because if it's police, the schools, and youth and family services, that's north of 60% of our budget, right? That we could be using for pot money. So that's like, that's really wide. And that's all I'm thinking is it's going to be a lot of money, I think. And it's better that we're pretty clear about how we're using that money up front.
No, I agree with you entirely. The only comment I'd make is I'd remind you that even if we had a policy, it's still, town meeting can still do what they want with it, right? So the policies guide us, not what town meeting does. And that's
so the town is going to vote wide, Ken, and I'm with, I
yes,
get that.
Yes.
But what I'm saying is we would have this town artifact, the policy that would say, even though to not pin us in, we voted wide, where our behaviors, our guiding principles should be that we are using it for these things. So
ultimately, the guardrail is town meeting. Because town meeting,
right, that's exactly my point.
That's exactly my point. $200,000 out of this, and if they can get 2/3 vote, it doesn't matter what we've said.
Right. That was my point, Jay. Is ultimately it's the 2/3 vote guardrail that even if we had no policy, if we got up there and said we recommend not doing this, and Ben got up there as a select board rep and said we recommend not doing this, town meeting could say, we appropriate and we want it. So.
Can I just add to Jay's point? The one thing I think just to, reword a little bit, but it's the initial setup. You want to give some flexibility to the future, but we can be clear when we set it up with those, relatively wide guardrails, what the intent is from the start, right? And so, there is that. And then the only thing, just to jump on one point that Jay had made, because I don't want to, the finance committee, the select board, or anybody to put themselves in a corner here. There is potential that we'd want to use it within the first 2 years before, the policy. I don't know that that's the case, but it would be, again, to what Ken and Dan just said. It ultimately comes down to the way that the 2/3 vote of a stabilization fund works at town meeting, and it would be a proposed use at town meeting, and that's why I'm comfortable with it too. Even going from the stance of setting it up through the article before we get to a better view in 2 years in the second iteration of a finance policy.
You've addressed my concerns, Travis. Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, so with that, do we want to then finally move on to a vote of the policy document so that I can remove all the red and the highlight and everything else and give Travis the version that is totally clean for him to.
So I'd make a motion that we recommend the policy document as presented by Dr. Shada to us and amended as we discussed. With an addition to ensure that we have a placeholder for dealing with cannabis revenue in the future.
I'll second that.
Okay, any further discussion on that vote? Okay, let's proceed to vote. Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Ms. Zemer?
Yes.
Mr. Alfred?
Yes.
Mr. Whitaker?
Yes.
Mr. Robinson?
No.
And Dr. Shea votes yes. So we're there 5-1. So Travis I'll clean up all the lettering and everything like that, and we'll go from there. So.
Okay. If you could, when you send it, can you just CC Sharon and Mary, and we'll all take a look?
I will absolutely do that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Wow, that's chime in before you move on from this topic.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ben?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you actually send me the document? Can you send it to me with your red lines and your changes?
Yeah. Well, I'll say yes with a caveat. The red that you saw in there was from Travis, not from us.
Whatever.
I highlighted in blue
you guys, however you indicate what changes you made versus what document.
I can give you it's just the blue highlighted areas that we went over.
And the only thing I'd say this has been changed so many times in so many hands that I wouldn't say that every change is annotated.
Yeah, I'd reread the whole thing.
Just send me the document with the changes that are highlighted, and then what you sent was fine, and I'll go through it. Because at the end of the day, the point is that my board our boards have to agree.
Yep.
So we have to. I need to understand what you've changed so we can talk about
Yes.
that.
And I have no problem with that. And Travis, just so you know, though, Travis has all the details. He's been a part of this whole discussion. So you can read it, but I'm saying if there's something that's unclear, you can come to me or you can go to Travis, is my point. Travis will have.
But I want to continue with that, which is to say, like, I would ask, as you go through your changes, as you look at the changes that you have, and before we, our boards talk, I would ask the question, are there any of those changes that you were willing to negotiate about, or are there changes that you're going to try to convince us to agree to? And you don't have to have an answer. I'm not asking you to have an answer. I'm just sort of putting that position out there that if you walk in and you say that this number is fungible, we'll negotiate on it, that's fine. And if you're like, that's an absolute number, think about it as the sense of like, you need to convince us. And because we haven't had a discussion of the granular detail, so I don't know what people are going to say about these kinds of things. I have my opinions, but I'm not going to share them right now anyway. If you can send that to me soon, Ken, then maybe next week I can reach out to you before you come before my board, so I can kind of give you my 2 cents. And so then you have a chance to sort of process, think about it. If you need to prepare anything or anything like that, you can have any of that information for yourself.
No problem.
And then the last thing I wanted to add was I had proposed, I talked to Dan at one point. Dan doesn't talk to me anymore, so I'm very lonely in that regard. I'm just kidding. We're all busy with school starting and things like that. But we had talked about timelines potentially, when with who does what when, and I'd sent those over to Dan. And I wanted to propose potentially having a discussion about that. And I realize we're talking about the warrant. We got a lot going on, but things like getting ready for budget season it starts happening pretty quickly after the warrant, after town meeting. So so I would just kind of, I'm not sure what the next steps are, but I kind of want to throw it out into the ether, and people can throw tomatoes at me or whatever. Thankfully we're on Zoom, so you can't throw any food at me, which is good. But at the same time, I do want to have the conversation, to my points about, when we have discussions about different things. And then to counter, I know when we talked about, like, for example, approving the budget, when does that happen? And then, to your counterpoint of when we approve the warrant, maybe we put some of that sort of language in there. And I think we could have some of that discussion. We could kind of agree on a schedule, long-term schedule. I don't know how that works. It's a tri-board meeting, whatever. I don't know. It's a meeting of the chairs, the meeting of the council of elders. I don't know. But at the same time, I think I'd like to see that. And if people want to throw cold water on it, that's fine. But I think that should be part at some point of the discussions of financial policies, of how things are done, when things are done, and who does them. So we're all in agreement. We all understand. That's my 2 cents. So thank you.
We can certainly, it's not just because we pass a document doesn't mean we stop talking. So we can have all these discussions. So, okay. Anything else? I guess we're done with the policy topic then. So last thing on the agenda are any liaison updates from anybody. If anybody's got any information to pass through from their liaisons. I don't have anything. It's relatively quiet, as it usually is this time of year when people haven't spent their budget into crisis yet. So, and now they tell Travis. So Travis tells us that stuff. So, okay, I don't see anybody's hands up. Okay, if that's the case, then we've reached the end of the agenda. So I will entertain the motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay. That concludes, well, I got to take a vote first. Can't say my closing message yet. Okay, so let's proceed to a vote. Mr. Murphy.
Yes.
Ms. Zemer.
Yes.
Mr. Alfred.
Yep.
Mr. Whitaker.
Yes.
Mr. Robinson.
Yes.
And I vote yes. Now that concludes the Tuesday, September 14th meeting of the Finance Committee. Thank you for joining us tonight. As you know, the recording will be posted on the website within 24 hours. But for tonight, we're done. So thank you and good night.